lifestyle, mindset, balance, energy. Wouldn't you love to hear some of those words at your next doctor's appointment? I love sharing a breadth of healing and health approaches with you, and today we'll chat with Dr. Jenny Tufenkian, a naturopathic doctor from the Pacific Northwest. This conversation expanded my horizons, and I'm really fired up to share it with you now. Welcome to the Wellness While Walking podcast. I'm your walking guide and health coach, Carolyn Cohen. Whether you've been walking or otherwise moving regularly, or it's fallen off your schedule, I'll be here to help you make your own wellness a priority. We'll plan for about a 30-minute walk each week, and while you're ambling, I'll be rambling in your ear. We will talk about walking a bit, but also about wellness in the largest sense of the word, so that we can continue on a journey of a beautiful life of no regrets. Let's chat, learn, laugh, and move in the most natural way possible, and then get back to designing and living the best, most rewarding lives we each ever imagined. Hi, welcome to episode 130. Thanks for being here with me today. Before we continue, a reminder that I'm not a doctor or mental health professional, and the content presented here is for educational and informational purposes only. Please make sure you check with your doctor before making any health or lifestyle changes. Hey there, it's Carolyn, and I'm on vacation. I'm enjoying America's Mountain West area, which is a big change from the Northeast where I live. It's been great to get a change of scenery and see our oldest child. I'll be sharing some stuff on social media. So social media is a mixed blessing for me. I love interacting with you and meeting new people there, but I also know it's a time suck, and often when I go onto it, I get pulled in ways that weren't my intention. And this isn't all bad. I mean, I absolutely come across articles I wouldn't have found otherwise, for example, but I also still struggle with following a bunch of algorithms that aren't in my or your best interest in order to be quote-unquote visible on social media. I just don't like to be manipulated, and I'm sure there are many ways that we're being manipulated that, I'm not even aware of. So it's a mixed bag, but long story short, well, it's probably too late for that, you might argue. Long story short-ish, I'll share some amazing things I did on this trip and what I saw and I learned, and I'll share those on Instagram and Facebook. I hope you're also getting some time away from your routine. Even doing the same stuff in a different place counts, and if we can get a little time in nature in, all the better. Before I jump into the meat of today's episode, I wanted to ask you a favor. It's a second favor, because my big ask of each episode is that you put yourself on your own list and do one thing to nurture and take care of yourself. My second favor, then, is that I'd be really appreciative if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast listening app if they have a place for that. iTunes is sort of the central repository for reviews, and you can leave one there even if you don't use iTunes, or actually Apple Podcasts, as it's now called. I'll do my best to leave instructions on how to do this in the show notes, though I swear every time I write out these steps, they change something. But anyway, I've heard from many of you directly, and you've said the nicest things about the show, and it would just be helpful to me if your impressions of Wellness While Walking could be shared with others who might be looking for, well, whatever we do here together. I know it's hard to remember to do this if you're on the go, so I'll try to end the episode with a little nudge to remind you if you're so inclined. And thanks for sending me those kind words, even if you don't post them publicly. It really helps me to know when the show is helpful to you and what you want more of in particular. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a listener and potentially a reviewer of Wellness While Walking. Okay, onward. The last two episodes, we spoke with Sarah Fay, who wrote of her story in the mental health system in her new book, Pathological. We spoke a lot about the snafus that big health systems can provide, and it's a pretty dire story. Sarah suggests some changes that could have potentially prevented her experience, and they're not really gigantic, expensive changes. One key one was to make sure that there's always hope offered to those receiving a diagnosis, and that was something that her decades-long pathway absolutely lacked. At the end of the last episode, I shared a bit about my medical diagnosis I received, where I was also given no hope of healing and was instead offered a handful of prescriptions I'd be on for life, which I would have taken in the hopes of thwarting the symptoms of the disease, not for healing it. I asked the original prescribing doctor, and he offered no hope of healing. If you didn't hear the whole story, you might want to go listen. It's at the end of episode 129. What you need to know here is that too often we're not told that there is hope to heal. The body is an amazing and complex system that wants to heal. And when we do some things to get out of its way or provide the inputs needed, often healing to some degree or even fully can happen. I want to make sure I illustrate this possibility by speaking with practitioners who offer hope to us, especially to those of us who've been diagnosed with a chronic condition. I was really blown away when I met today's guest, Dr. Jenny Tufenkian, and I was really thrilled when she said she'd join us for a conversation. I know you'll see why shortly. When you hear about her approach, which includes an extremely long list of tools in her toolkit, as you'll hear her say, I hope it'll give you pause, that maybe it's something you need to hear as you grapple with not feeling great, or maybe it's something we stash away to use later potentially. And, really the message is, don't give up. If we're not being listened to, or if we've hit a terrible patch in terms of our health, there is often, almost always, still hope. While it can be expensive in every way, in terms of money, time, physical energy, emotional energy, and more, if there's any rock left unturned, I'd urge you not to rule out turning it over, even if it can't be right now. The difference can be made by finding the right practitioner or guide, and I think today's conversation will underscore that. I'm excited to have you hear from Dr. Jenny, and you'll also hear from her dog and then my dog, so I hope that brings a smile to your face as well. I'll be back at the end. I'm really thrilled today to be here with Dr. Jenny Tufenkian. She's a naturopathic physician based in the Portland, Oregon area. And we have connected of late, and I've hung on her every word. I think you're going to be so thrilled to learn from her. We have a great agenda ahead, so I'm really thrilled that it worked out.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
So Dr. Jenny is, like I said, a naturopathic physician, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about naturopathic training in general.
Sure. Naturopathic training varies depending on which institution you go to, but in the state where I live, our training is equivalent to a primary care physician. So I'm actually a licensed primary care doctor in my state. That's not true because naturopathic physicians are licensed by the state. There's not a national licensing body for us at this time. That's in the works, but it isn't there yet. So if you're looking for a naturopathic physician, I just really highly recommend you check out what their training and coverage is and just make sure it's a good match for you. But what I always tell people, the differences are when I attend naturopathic school, I am from day one looking at the body and the person through the lens of a different perspective than from conventional medicine. And what I mean by that is that we are imbued with what we call naturopathic philosophy, which is this understanding that everything in the body is connected. That, if somebody comes in with a headache, we want to know what's going on with the head, and we want to take a good history and do our proper differential diagnosis, just like any other practitioner would, is to just rule out the scary stuff, make sure it's not a scary tumor or something like that, figure out the patterns. But when we're trying to figure out what is actually causing that headache, we're looking throughout the whole being. Does it have to do something else? Maybe it's to do with the gut. Maybe it's some sort of digestive microbiome problem. Now, most of your listeners will go, well, yeah, sure, of course. But 20 years ago when I was in school, that was considered weird.
Yes.
Your head is connected to your gut, really?
Yeah, it is. It is still surprising, I think, to so many people. Like when they hear that you can get a concussion and within minutes, your microbiome has changed.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And there's so much we can talk about with that kind of head concussion stuff. And so we're looking at the root cause of what's going on. And we're looking at not just the physical body, but also the emotional and energetic body. Was there some sort of emotional trauma that's impacting you? And that's leading to sort of a subconscious pattern that's creating muscle tension in your head in a certain way. So we're looking at all those different levels. And then when it comes to treatment, we have a huge variety. Like I always tell people, my toolkit is wide and deep. So in my state, licensed here, I can actually prescribe a lot of pharmaceutical medications if I want to. But usually what I'm leaning on more are things like lifestyle, on mindset. I'm working on, I use a lot of botanicals, herbal medicines, homeopathic remedies, nutraceuticals, amino acids, vitamins, supplements, all that kind of stuff. So again, huge breadth and width. And personally, how I practice is I'm always looking to see what's the best match for the person that sits in front of me, because some people are really sensitive and they need a more energetic medicine. And some people need something like a really stronger, more dense type of medicine to impact their body. The other thing that I would say that's different, two other things about naturopaths. One is that most of us really believe in this thing that they call the life force or vitae that's in our body. And when we get our bodies back into balance, that energetic system really is there to support and promote health. And so if we're feeling unhealthy or in dis-ease, it's because there's been a disruption in the force, as we would say. And we need to do, as we start practicing things that bring us into more balance, more health, that vital force can really have a huge impact. And then the last thing I would say is the real word of doctor means docere, which means to teach. And so we're all about educating the people that come in front of us so that they can be empowered in their own health. And that is so part of my mission. I think you and I share that when we talk. It's all about how is it that I can feel, we as people who have bodies feel more empowered to take our health to the next level by what we choose to do with our day, how we choose to think, what we choose to eat, how we choose to supplement, who we choose to hang out with. Like, what are all the things that we make day in and day out, the decisions that we make that can take us to a higher level? And how can we become more sophisticated in understanding what our own unique individual body needs so that we can not only get ourselves feeling better, but also prevent ourselves from tanking at times of stress or illness, and when other stuff kind of is powerful and strong, it tends to throw us off.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that was only about 100 things that we could follow up on. So let me start with the real basics. So you talked about your state. Can you just explain what other kinds of situations there might be across the United States? And if you know anything about the international naturopathic situation, and you could share that as well, that'd be awesome.
Right. I can't really speak to the international situation for naturopathic medicine because it doesn't have an international body that I'm aware of. But I can tell you from state to state, there are a number of states who are actually licensed, and you can be a licensed provider in other states. Some of those states, they may be able to prescribe medications and do IV treatments. Other states, they may not. It just varies from state by state. So I would just check the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians is your best resource to go to, and type in your state if you're curious what your coverage is. There are schools in the United States where you can study to become a naturopathic physician, where you can practice medicine like I do as a primary care doctor. And then there are other schools where people become naturopathic doctors. My understanding is that those institutions, those practitioners, they get a lot of really good book education, but they don't have the clinical experience and practice as part of their education. And so they come out with a lot of knowledge, but not the clinical experience. And those degrees do not allow those people to become clinicians. They can be really great health coaches and support team for you. So just being clear, the different names have slightly different meanings.
Perfect. And I'll link to the organization you just mentioned and some other resources so people can figure out what's going on near them. Thank you. Okay. So we're used to, in the conventional medicine world, going for our annual physical, going maybe to a specialist, going to a sick visit occasionally. It sounds like from what you're talking about with your very broad and deep toolkit that you would be seeing patients a little bit differently. If you're trying to get something like mindset, like that could, it was the average medical visit, like 11 minutes, you could just talk about that for quite a while, I'm guessing. So how do you see patients? Like, and if a person were to see a naturopathic physician, like how could they expect that kind of relationship to differ?
I can speak to how I practice. Different practitioners, they practice obviously in different ways, but I would say the majority of us do spend a lot of time with our patients compared to a conventional medical visit. My first patient visits are an hour long, and I do a very thorough history. And then my follow-ups are usually around 45 minutes. Now, what I would say is that sometimes people have problems and they're just more on that physical level. And so then it is lab testing and history and trying out different treatments and seeing what works. But then other times, like you said, it's more on that mental, emotional, energetic, spiritual body. And so that means that maybe the next few visits, you're going to be diving into that space.
But the visits would be maybe a regular visit for a period of time.
Yeah, it depends on what the patient needs. So my real wheelhouse is working with people with really complex health conditions. So usually the people I see have usually been to many, many other doctors and not quite gotten the answers that they need. And I work with people who have chronic fatigue, long COVID. There's usually a lot of other things layered on there, irritable bowel syndrome, SIBO, anxiety, menstrual, hormonal craziness, bad sleep, brain fog. I mean, usually my patients come in with a lot of stuff and they're like, "Are you sure you can do all this?" And I'm like, "Lay it on me."
That beep indicates we're about halfway through the episode, so if you're not walking a loop, you might want to turn around and head back now.
I really enjoy being able to really dive in to those more complex cases and puzzles when the person is ready to actually do the work. So I love working with people who are just so ready to dive in. They may be exhausted and not feeling well, but they just believe somewhere deep inside themselves that there's hope for them and there's some kind of answer out there, and they are willing to take the steps and do the work to do that discovery with the right guide. And so that's really where I shine. So to answer your question, when I'm working with those kind of people, whether it's one-on-one or in groups, it makes what I have seen work the best is sort of a typical pattern where people come in, we do their deep dive history. Sometimes we need 2 appointments to really get that whole history dialed in. We do some investigation with different kinds of labs. I'm looking at their past records and their labs. And then it usually is a series of appointments in the beginning that are fairly frequent. So it's every week or every couple weeks for maybe 4 or 5 appointments so that I can get a good understanding of what's going on with them and where they're going. They could get a good understanding of what I'm thinking and the first steps I'm expecting them to take. And then it's really a period of experiment. I always say that there's this 5-step process to dealing with complex conditions, and one of them is assessment. And so we're sort of doing that. We're doing that assessing period together. And then the next step is really where you calibrate, you're testing, you're seeing, you're using your body as its own biofeedback tool. And you're saying, well, what happens if you take this supplement or this remedy or this medication? How does your body respond? Does it take care of things? Does it not? Does it make it worse? Does it make it better? And I always tell people, you need to give me feedback. And I want to say this to anyone who's listening right now. I don't care who you're working with. I want you to know that what you're experiencing, you know your body better than everybody else. And so never discount your own experience of what you're feeling, and make sure whoever it is that's working with you in your healthcare emotional support team, that you're giving them feedback and you're being really honest and clear about what your experience is, because this is how they can help you better. You really need to learn how to utilize those people around us so that we can help each other rise.
Absolutely. There is something just healing unto itself to be able to give feedback and to feel like, you can let someone know how it's going for you. Right?
That voicing our experience is a form of empowerment. And one of the gifts that we can give ourselves is that voicing. And then one of the gifts we can give to others is listening to that, right? Is witnessing and hearing that voicing.
Listening is a gift. It's free, but it's not plentiful, unfortunately. So it's wonderful to be able to give that to somebody.
Yeah.
So thank you on behalf of everyone who has a complex medical case, because I think that so many people have experienced an inability to get to the bottom of something when they sense that there is a better life for them.
Yeah. I also say to people, I always believe there's always hope. I always encourage people to keep knocking on doors, just keep trying, because I believe there's always an answer for us. We just need to keep finding that place inside ourselves where we're willing to continue to seek the support and guidance we need.
Yes. I have heard of a couple of people who've, almost on the verge of giving up. So I hope that if anybody's listening to this, that they give it one more go and try to find somebody who can be that guide, as you alluded to. So thank you. So you mentioned the 5-step process and you talked about assessment and calibrating. Do you mind finishing up and letting us know what the other steps are?
No, I'd be happy to. So yeah, the third step is really fun. I always call it your personal power-up toolkit. This is where after you've done the assessment and you've done the calibration and you've come to understand what is it that really works for your body with what's going on with you right now. So for you, this is the Walking Wellness podcast, right? So have you figured out, what time it works for you to exercise and what kind of exercise works for you? Those are now tools that go in your toolkit. Or what kind of exercise can you do when you're traveling versus the kind of exercise you can do when you're driving your kids around from summer camp to summer camp? That becomes you becoming sophisticated with your toolkit. Or what's your favorite essential oil that you use when you're feeling stressed out? That goes in your toolkit. I mean, these are sort of, the day-to-day things that we use as tools. And so I'm talking about doing that plus more complex, deep stuff. What's your toolkit? I have my toolkit to help me so I don't reactivate my chronic fatigue. And the more sophisticated we get with that, the more we feel empowered and stronger, and we increase our resilience. So personal power-up toolkit. So a lot of people just kind of stop there because they're feeling fine. For those that are interested in going to a deeper level of healing, there's this really cool phase that I call deep cognizance, which is where we go deeper in. And usually what happens after the body does its first levels of healing is it can kind of stay there, or it can go into a deeper level where it's like, wow, there's all this emotional stuff from my past that I've never really dealt with. And so that can come up. You can do deep emotional work, or it may be that you have a latent virus in your cells or some sort of infection that's been lingering in your gut. And this is an opportunity for the body to begin to bring it up. Sometimes it happens spontaneously. This is kind of that vitae, that force of life in us, where the body goes, well, now that you've got me on the better diet and I'm not dealing with this inflammation every day, and now that I'm sleeping better, I wanted to let you know that there's this other thing that's been going on that's bothering me. And here you go. Here it is, Jenny. Let's deal with this now.
Wow.
And I always consider it's like when you clean your house and it looks really good. And then you're like, okay, you know what? That closet that has boxes in it that have been there ever since I got married, I'm taking those boxes out now. And the house may look messy for a minute, but as soon as we get those boxes sorted out, it's going to feel so good. And so that's deep cognizance, and it's fun. It's intense. It's like, deeper dives and cleanse and, detoxifying from heavy metals or working with chronic infections or emotional toxicity. And they tend to bind up together. All those things kind of bind up in the body. So it tends to be once you work on one, others come up. So that's for those who are willing to go a little deeper and get a little messier. And then the fifth is really fun. I love witnessing this when we get to do this work, is deep transformation. And people really come out of this coming into being a new way of being themselves. I just did a Joe Dispenza retreat a few weeks ago, and a lot of what he's doing is working on this. How is it that you can shift your energy in your cells and in your being so that you can open up to a new potential and be in a different way? I see this for people when they do these steps and they start really healing their body and they work with the chronic stuff they've been hanging around, and whether it's toxins in your cells, or whether it's viruses or bacteria or fungus, or whether it's emotional stuff or some combination. When you get that shifted and you understand how to take care of your unique self, then you really are free. It's literally a freedom to come out and become this new way. I just had somebody who went through my group program, and it was a 12-month program. She came in feeling absolutely exhausted, like on the couch all day, felt terribly guilty. Her partner was really angry at her because he would come home from work and she still hadn't cleaned the house, but she was too tired. She could hardly go grocery shopping. As we worked through the stages and we did this work, again, it was in a group. She did my online program, and then we did a group meeting. And by the end, she was really making these massive transformations. And she just called me up. She wants to do a testimonial with me next week. She's like, Dr. Jenny, you won't believe what's happening. She is rediscovered her love of art. She's doing some amazing artwork. She is rediscovered her love of music, and she's doing music. And she has started a new business, and she is now starting a new business with somebody else and doing amazing work. And so here's a woman who thought she was never, ever going to be able to work again, let alone do the housework, and feared not being able to stay married because she was just not doing her part of the job in the relationship. And now she's just like so happy and so vital and doing this whole new thing. And I can't tell you, gives me chills to talk about it, because I see this when we're willing to do that deep work, like really true transformation. And again, I just feel so grateful to witness it. It's beautiful. And I think it's there for all of us. I mean, I think that potential is there for all of us to make ourselves into the best version of ourselves that we can be at this time.
Wow, that is so inspiring. And we might need to talk. I feel like I'm at number 3. Maybe I need to go take advantage of these further steps, because I don't think maybe we can even imagine what that looks like for us necessarily.
Yeah, that's the thing. We can't, because the brain actually prefers to stay in its safety mode, and its safety mode is continuing to do what we've always done. And so I think in some ways that's the gift of a challenging, hard time. I mean, I'll say people, I always believe that whenever we have a really hard time, whether it's a financial hard time, an emotional hard time, illness, an injury, a lot of us have had a lot of those in the last 2 years, like, I don't know anyone who hasn't had oh no, you're kidding, that too. I don't know a person who hasn't been thrown through the ringer in the last 2 years, but I honestly still believe the gift of this, as hard as that is when you're in it, the gift can be that it's a breakdown time. And when we break down and we have to kind of let go of all that what we knew, the things that we had control over, the stuff that was making us feel like, oh, this is who I am, and my ego is attached to this. The gift of those breakdowns, again, they're awful when you're in them, but the gift is that it is an opportunity to open up to a new potential. And whether that's a new potential within yourself and a new connection to being in a different way. And I just see this over and over again.
It must be really gratifying. So thanks for sharing that. That's even possible. And maybe we'll have to have you come back and talk just about the deep transformations again, because it's really just so hopeful, especially for somebody who I'm sure could not even imagine feeling halfway decent, to then having this.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful thought to think about. I would love to just share that, because I do think that that's one of the pieces that we don't talk about enough. And as you saying that is making me realize it right here in real time, that's something we don't talk about enough. And one of the things I'm aware of, if anybody listening to this, or anyone who has chronic fatigue, one thing as I talk about all the time with chronic fatigue is that we tend to live within under our own glass ceiling. When you're exhausted all the time, you're sort of in this you're in this energy budgeting mode all the time. You're always afraid that you're not going to have enough. You're anticipating a crash. You're keeping yourself under the ceiling. And I always call it the land of beige. I hate beige. And so calling it the land of beige it's like the worst. I hate living in the land of beige. I don't live in a passionate, exciting, colorful life. And when you're struggling with chronic fatigue, you stay in this little box. And it's part of the game is learning how to break through your own glass ceiling so that you can move on to that next level. But I agree. I think a lot of us do that no matter what, because like I said,
Right. And then even if you're making a change, it might be a little bit of a change, but you're not seeing, how big a transformation is possible. That's great.
Right.
Sorry to cut our chat off here. I can tell you that one of Dr. Jenny's specialties is working with people who have fatigue. That might be regular old fatigue, which actually shouldn't be regular, and then also chronic fatigue, which shows up in a variety of ways. I think you'll appreciate hearing her talk about that and also about lifestyle changes that she finds pivotal, and we'll get to those in the rest of the chat, which I'll air next week, along with some other recent studies that shed a light on some things we can be considering for our health. I'm sure you could hear Dr. Jenny's commitment come through. Clearly, she's an incredibly smart practitioner, and I'd say that a non-negotiable when we're looking for someone in whose hands we're placing our well-being. Dr. Jenny brings all of those years of education and clinical training to her practice, and also something else that's big, which is how she looks at disease. You heard her spell out dis-ease, as in when we're not living with ease. That is the gold standard. There are so many facets to addressing dis-ease and rebuilding health, and all too often we don't get a chance to avail ourselves of those other aspects of healing. Dr. Jenny will tell a little more about her own health journey and the realistic perspective she brings to her practice because of that. Realistic and hopeful, I should say. We can all learn from Dr. Jenny, and I'll link to the ways to do this and maybe even become a patient. She has programs online and other ways to work with us, even if we're not in the Portland, Oregon area. I think the gift of today's episode, in my mind, is that we can see that there's a very broad range of doctors and practitioners, and we might be able to find one who works like Dr. Jenny does if that's appealing to us. I'll also try to dig around for more information beyond the U.S. about naturopathic practices, though my experience is that many practitioners in other countries do use a holistic approach. Definitely come back next week as we tie up our empowering and hopeful conversation. And if you do get to write a review of Wellness While Walking, awesome, but only after you take care of you. Check out the show notes for tips on how to write that review and where to find me on social, and also via email if you're not on social. Okay, I'm excited to be back with you again next week. See you next time. A reminder that neither I nor my podcast guests are doctors or healthcare professionals of any kind, and nothing on this podcast or associated content should be considered medical advice. The information provided by Wellness While Walking, Whole Life Workshop, and Bermuda Road Wellness, LLC, is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking any new healthcare regimen, including walking.